Hello, and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 17th episode in our ongoing series and the first of our new year. Our January 2024 episode features an interview with singer-songwriter and activist Michelle Schacht. Our conversation with IGS trustees Lance Straight and Tom Gencarelli was recorded in Randy Hudson's VoxPod New York City studio. Let's listen in as Michelle Schacht talks about her background and her music and treats us to a live performance.
Well, hello and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Lance Straight. I'm here with my colleague Tom Gencarelli, and we're coming to you today from VoxPod Studios in New York City, because this is a very special episode that we have with a very special guest today, Michelle Schacht. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here with two of my favorite people in the whole world.
Great to have you.
Yes, it is. And it's great to have you as part of our general semantics community. So on that, we're also very happy. And I should note that before we go any further, that coming up next month, or it may be this month, depending on when you're listening to this, or it may be long ago, perhaps even centuries from now. We never know how long these recordings will last. But for us here, sitting here right now, it's next month. That is February 15th. Of 2024. It still sounds funny saying 2024, but February 15th of 2024, the Institute of General Semantics, along with the New York Society for General Semantics, will be sponsoring a very special event, a concert, a musical type concert featuring Michelle Schacht, along with Tom's band, Blue Race, which will be held at the Players Club down in the Gramercy section of New York, of Manhattan. And for more information on that and to register, which is required, you'll need to go to our website, the IGS website, generalsemantics.org. And that's something we're very much looking forward to.
That's right, fellow time binders. Come on down and have a real musical experience.
And of course, that's one of the reasons why we're hoping that you're listening now or soon and not after the fact.
Not that there's anything wrong with listening a month from now, or a year from now, or a century from now when we're all dead. Who knows? But in any event, here we are. And it's great to have this opportunity to talk to Michelle, and I thought we could perhaps start by looking back at your life story. And I understand that you were born some time ago in another part of the country.
That's right. I'm tempted to tease you because of how much time binding plays a role in our understanding of general semantics. So last week I got up, I had a cup of coffee, and then I made my bed. But in 1962, I was delivered at a hospital in Dallas to an 18-year-old girl, and she had met my father at a state fair, the State Fair of Texas. He was taking tickets on the Tilt-A-Whirl. And hey, baby, 9 months later, here I come. And my father...
Not conceived on the Tilt-A-Whirl, I hope.
Actually, in the back seat of my Uncle Hubie Chevy. So I was the progeny of two juvenile delinquents. My father was a school teacher at the time, and or after he graduated, I should say, from college. And they divorced not too long after that. And I grew up with my mother, who converted to the Mormon faith when I was about 5 or 6. So I was raised by my stepfather. And my mother in a closed community which was both Mormon and military. But my ideals, my vision was that of my father, who was a devout atheist, preaching the gospel of Madalyn Murray O'Hair and Robert Ingersoll. But he had been raised Catholic by a single mother in the 50s, so I always attributed his devotion to Catholic damage. But then I ran away from home when I was 16 and pursued my dream of living with my father, where he had a very strong influence on me, not just philosophically, but also musically. I remember, had this little prepared lecture where he told me the beauty of playing music is that it stimulates your mind, that you can make, connections and meet people. You can travel with it. It's an occupation you can do anywhere in the world. And I like to say that my father's influence was not deep, but it was meaningful, because just at that point I was trying to decide on a major in college, and he said that no matter what he had learned in life, he always needed to be able to communicate it.
Well, we had the privilege, Tom and I, of meeting your father, who is a wonderful musician, I have to say. We were very impressed.
Yeah, that was fun. Listen to him play on his mandolin, or your mandolin, that beautiful old instrument, and it was great.
Well, then you're going to be excited to know that I brought with me today his latest CD, which includes an unlicensed cover of my song Over the Waterfall.
Well, I guess he got your permission.
He did not.
Uh-oh. Well, we try to keep family stuff far away from our itinerary.
And our professional goings-on. Yeah.
I imagine he felt entitled. In any event, yeah, I studied communications at the University of Texas, speech communication.
Oh, which branch?
It was, my particular discipline was called oral interpretation of literature, but it was a specialty.
Oh, I
under
love
Dr.
oral
Paul
interpretation. They changed the name to performance some years ago, but back when I was a student, it was called oral interpretation, and it was a lovely kind of activity.
I think also when he was asking you what branch, which branch campus?
Yeah, actually, I meant which town.
I'm sorry, in Austin.
In Austin.
The big one.
The big one, right? The good one.
But listen, y'all, this is no shade on your practice, your academic practice, but my intention was to come out of college with a useless degree that would make me unemployable.
And it looks like you succeeded. Well, so you grew up in Texas, and you turned to music. And how did you get your big breakthrough? I know that's a story that's well established, but I think not everyone knows it, and it's good to hear it in your own words.
So, certainly not
today.
everyone in our audience.
Yeah.
I was at a festival in Kerrville, Texas, right outside of Austin, in May of 1986, and this Englishman had a Sony Walkman, and he heard me playing my music around the campfires and asked if I would sing some of my songs into his Sony Walkman. And I said, sure. He told me at the time he was a journalist. What he did not tell me was that he owned a record label. And after the festival, I came back here to New York, where we're talking, and I got, through a friend, a letter in the mail that said, oh, your album is doing rather well on the independent charts in England. And my response was, what album? Tom's going, what the fuck?
Right. I'm sorry. I can't do the silent what?
So that's how I found out that I had an album, and it had been released under the title The Texas Campfire Tapes. and it was considered quite quaint and rustic, with crickets chirping in the background and trucks driving by. Sitting at a campfire, you can hear the logs blazing and all that. So at the time, people responded like, "Aren't you lucky? It's like a Cinderella fairy tale. You've been discovered by a charming prince and taken away to, you have a career in music." Now,
What is it? It's like sipping a ice cream soda at Kresge's or something. The old
Schratt's.
Lana
Schratt's
Turner.
soda.
Now,
But now they understand, no, this was a flagrant violation of every single artist right conceivable. You name it, it was violated.
well, I was going to ask. I mean, so you're becoming famous in England, but are you getting your mechanical royalties? Are you getting your licensing from all of the playing of your songs? It's
Woo, from 0 to 60, here we go.
Okay.
Are you suggesting, Tom Gincarelli, that as long as you pay a slave that they're not a slave? Doesn't someone have an option to volunteer their labor without it being compelled?
absolutely. But given the way that things went, that is the reason for my question. After the fact, I would certainly expect that if a record label is benefiting from my art, that well, of course, not only should I know about it, but I should have recompense.
It goes from bad to worse. Let me tell you what they did. They went to a major label and said, "Hey, we got this girl. You want to sign her? She has a piece of paper with us." Now, let me ask you, did I know that they were trying to broker this deal? Did I know that no piece of paper had been signed between me and them? How long did it take me to discover that I was being sold like chattel to a label under false pretenses? And because it was a major label, who were they going to believe, me or them? So you see why the escalation of that question, am I getting mechanical royalties, skips right over a number of steps, starting with the moral rights of authors. And second to that is the fact that I have, under copyright law, something called the right of first use. That in publication of a work, I get to determine whether to publish that work first or not. And the fact that they did not have a license for that work meant it was double indemnity. They were 2 times down on not just the performance right, which is really what your question concerns, but also on the publication thereof.
Well, let's back up for a second, too. And I don't really want to get into too much of the weeds for our listeners, but the songs that you were playing around the campfire, were they copyrighted at the time?
It turns out that one is qualified for a copyright the moment one composes the work. Now, the reason you register a copyright, which is really what your question is because if it push comes to shove, goes to a legal forum,
Yes.
you need to have those works registered in order to claim your full entitlement to what's known as statutory damages. But you have a copyright, just like you're a 4-year-old kid playing in a sandbox and you make a mud pie. If some other kid comes and takes that mud pie, you know at 4 years old, hey, that's mine. I made it.
If only I'd known back then.
Listen and learn, young grasshopper.
So, what happened?
I released a studio album called Short Sharp Shock in 1988. It was nominated for a Grammy, and it was literally like being shot out of a cannon with no emotional or spiritual or even interpersonal infrastructure to support it. I found myself in a constant turmoil of trying to understand, as we say in general semantics, what is going on? And
Wiggle.
I discovered that I was an accidental rock star. And I had some ideas that were informed by my political influences about what it means to work inside a system to affect change versus standing outside that system shaking my fists and railing at it. So following a political mantra, I decided that it would be more hypocritical to refuse this opportunity than to become an opportunist and see what damage I could do from inside the system. But I made myself a promise that if at any point while working inside that system, if the privileges and the perks of being an insider meant that I was not being true to my principles, that I would fight to have the integrity to remove myself from said system. And that's exactly how it unfolded. In 1992, the senior vice president of business affairs told me that I had negotiated too good a deal for myself, which was 2 albums plus 5 options, but I owned the masters. And that if I was ever going to be properly presented to the world, I would need to renegotiate. Now, that's just hardball negotiating tactics. Every business does this, but I was too principled and high-minded to understand that I was now at that point where I had to make a choice. And so I stood my ground and I refused to renegotiate, and the consequence was I was basically put on ice for 6 years. And finally a lawyer filed a lawsuit claiming that my 13th Amendment rights were being violated. Do y'all remember your constitutional amendments?
Not all of them.
Which one do you think
13th.
the 13th is?
Going through them in my head.
Think.
Well, why don't you tell us? Since
Oh!
Because we're not
That's a
constitutional
fail.
scholars.
Okay, the 13th Amendment was the one that abolished slavery. And the day before the case went to court, like Pharaoh to Moses, the label said, "Take your masters and go." And so now I was free. And so in 2002, I launched an independent label where I learned another important business principle is that having rights is one thing. Exercising them in an asymmetrical power imbalance is another thing entirely different. So I launched my independent label in 2002. But by then, Napster was on the event horizon, and it decimated the entire proposition of what it means to be an independent creator owning the tools of my own labor, and I was now competing with free. So back to square one, slave again.
Before we get into the age of digital music files and stealing via Napster and Nutella and Kazaa and all of that, I don't want to, derail the story as you're telling it, but I have an interesting question. If you started out, if your career that you didn't necessarily mean to have happened accidentally, how is it that you were able to have ownership of your masters? How did you cut that deal?
I went over that point rather quickly, so let me go back. When the independent label told the major label that they were interested in negotiating a deal, but that they had a contract with me, I knew that I hadn't signed a contract with them. They knew I hadn't signed a contract with them. But they were really interested in closing this deal with the major label because on that basis, they obtained a distribution deal. And so I was using political principles without knowledge of this backroom deal that was taking place. And Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys had kind of set the template. And not too long after that, Prince, if you don't own your masters, you are a slave. And so I stood on a principle. I don't want the I don't want the advance. Keep the advance. I want the masters. And so that independent label was so keen to close that deal that they actually represented that point. That's something that Taylor Swift didn't accomplish.
Right.
George Michael certainly didn't accomplish it, or Prince. I did.
A young Jedi, you learned from the masters about the masters.
But maybe also to step back, because it's actually quite fascinating, this sort of accidental stardom, and certainly in other areas like media ecology, that we look at the effect of media really going back, through the 20th century on creating the very concept of a star and the idea of celebrity, which, of course, Daniel Boorstin was very important in first writing about. So you become a star, and there's a particular song that really takes off, and that really has a lot to do with that. Is that correct?
There was a single that was released called Anchorage. And a typical marketing strategy for a major label when they're marketing a singer-songwriter is to create a signature song. Like you think of Carole King and Tapestry comes to mind, or I think even Laurie Anderson had like, Superman.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's, that's one for the ages. So Anchorage is my signature song. But when I handed in my second album, their response was, we don't hear a single. They wanted me to make the same album over and over and over again. And what I had determined when I signed the contract was, I'm going to make 3 albums, and each album's going to be different. Mm-hmm. And after the third album, if you want to pull the lens back and then decide how to market me, knock yourself out. But I basically claim that by creating a folk rock album that had the single Anchorage on it, by creating a swing album that covered the waterfront from big band to jump to, bebop, and then by creating an album of traditional roots music coming from, Appalachian sources and so forth, that I basically created the modern or the contemporary notion of Americana. But I don't get to wear that crown. I created it, but I don't get to wear that crown. So I'm not bitter about it, but I was just 15 minutes ahead of my time. I don't know if that gets close to the question that you're asking, Lance, about inadvertent celebrity or how marketing plays a very important role in the framing of how we perceive someone. But yeah, Anchorage is probably my best known song.
I think, what you're bringing up is very interesting, and it's partly marketing and partly also the audience itself, where, you often find that audiences exposed to, say, 1 or 2 songs from an artist expect everything else to be the same, and then they're shocked, say, people who don't know the Beatles, just to take an example, and then they hear Helter Skelter, can't believe that that's the Beatles, that they're doing something that's basically proto-heavy metal, as opposed to the kind of love songs that they're used to hearing, or pop songs.
I think it's kind of 2 things. That on the one side, and I always remember Joni's phrase, the star-making machinery behind the popular song, there's the industry and how they think about what an artist is and how to, I'll use the word manufacture an artist, but then there is exactly what you just said about how we listen, and we hear a song and we hear that song many times, or it catches our ear really quickly, becomes an earworm, and then then the artist wants to do something new, the artist wants to do something different, but no, that's not what the listener who's already hooked expects. It's interesting. I'll just jump in real quick and say that given that my band is going to be Michelle's band for this night at the Players Club, she sent us all of the material, and I listened to it, and I said exactly what you just said before, that I listen through this group of 13 songs and I hear this traipse across Americana music. Everything is in there, and I'm listening to it. And I'm saying, I don't know if we can do all of this, but it's fat, and you got these great players to do it every time, and I mean, it was absolutely marvelous to listen to it all.
But can we also say, I mean, this is a general semantics principle as well of abstracting, where which relates to stereotyping. We put things in a category, and we think that category is all that can be said about whatever it is we're talking about, whereas in modern parlance there's a great deal of intersectionality, and people don't and phenomena of all kinds don't fit neatly into set categories. Things are fuzzy, boundaries are fuzzy, and especially artists like to explore different kinds of genres, if you like, or categories. They don't like to be pigeonholed, and that's the worst thing you can do. I would say to an artist, is to say, you do this kind of thing and nothing else.
I mean, Michelle, let me ask it this way, right? To start out and say, I want to make 3 different albums, and each one will go in a particular direction, and that's my plan, not just my hope. As someone who writes, I write what comes to me. I don't think I'm pretty good at making that plan and saying I'm going to do something different. If something different comes to me, great, welcome. Thank you. To the universe. But how did you plan that?
I think it probably goes back to my father, who he stopped teaching school because he had, in his spare time, began building a boat from books. He had books on how to build boats. And in the course of building this boat in his backyard in Texas, he had all these tools and all these skills that he learned. And so he eventually gave up teaching school and started buying an old house, moving in, fixing it up, and then after selling it, buying another old house, fixing it up. And so while he would be working on the house, he would have a turntable. And the cool thing about vinyl is that you can leave the rocker arm up on the turntable and the same record will spin over and over and over again. And so the summers I would spend working with my father, and he had an album collection. And that album collection characterized those 3 influences. He had Texas songwriters like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt. I remember Carla Bonoff and Randy Newman. He also had blues like Lead Belly and Lightnin' Hopkins and Big Bill Broonzy. And he also was his current passion, a collection of what was typically called bluegrass, but like I said, it was fiddle tunes and stuff, because he was teaching himself how to play mandolin out of a book. So you can see very clearly that the nut didn't fall far from the tree. Sure.
Well, when I think of Americana, I go back to like Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead as examples of that. But who, apart from those folks you just named, I mean, who would you say were your big influences coming into this?
Abby Hoffman.
That's great.
Well, apart from levitating the Pentagon and all,
being an anarchist.
Marshall McLuhan.
But
really? Yeah.
It was actually Abby Hoffman who said, I prefer Marshall McLuhan to Karl Marx. And I was like, that's all I needed. I did not want to become a Marxist, but I definitely wanted to be a radical. I wanted to be a revolutionary. And so I got my hands on the medium is the massage, right? Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah.
And understanding media. And I was living in a squat in Amsterdam, and I had 2 books. That was one, and the other was From Socrates to Sartre. It was like a...
Oh, I have that one. The little paperback, the little pocketbook, History of Philosophy.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Who's the author?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but it was like seminal to have those 2 books. And, in Amsterdam, I had 0 money, 0 heat, 0 food. I would curl up in this little army sleeping bag in a squat, and I would just read these books over and over. I liked having a very limited library of 2 books and just like becoming imbued with those ideas. Yeah.
All right, so I sort of hijacked things as we were about to talk about going independent at the time of the turn of the century and Napster, in the first iteration of Napster, before they tried to professionalize it and make it into an actual business. What happened then? Can we pick up where you left off?
Yeah, go ahead and ask me a related question just so I can really stay on the straight and narrow with what we're trying to get to.
Well, you said that you went off on your own, but that because of the shift in really what was the record industry you started in, into a record industry where we started to dismantle the idea of ownership of intellectual property and creative property, and started to steal things online or allow people to steal things online, and thus the fact that you sort of had a vocation suddenly was changed by these radical things going on that you had no control over whatsoever.
I don't quite know how to get from your point A to my point A, but I'm going to try by making a grand statement and just kind of keep this in the background as we go from here, okay? Mm-hmm. What do you call someone who is compelled to provide their labor without compensation? That word, please.
A slave.
Thank you. Are we going to be politically incorrect for taking this conversation in a direction where we're looking at modern slavery?
I don't think so. Given what we're talking about and given how it's changed since then.
I'm provoking Lance because last I heard, information wants to be free. Please go on, Lance.
No, but are you asking, are we intending to be politically correct, or would it be politically correct to do that?
It's an excellent question. I'm just in my role as provocateur making sure that there is a dramatic tension here. Because if knowledge is power and knowledge is a source extracted from labor, we have a conundrum here and we need to get to the bottom of this.
Well, and I think we can understand, and I guess we'll come at it from a general semantics point of view, that the term slave has multiple meanings and reference points, so that, say, slavery that's depicted in the Bible is different from perhaps the institution of slavery in the Roman Empire, where the slaves could actually have their own slaves, for example. Which is different from the slavery that went on in the colonial and early republic here in America, which is different from what we might call wage slaves, and is different from what you're referring to. So I think as long as we keep that in mind, we can use that word. And it's not, wouldn't be a concern for us.
And that is why you two are some of my favorite people in the world. I adore having this quality of conversation because I am by nature a fire starter. I throw Molotov cocktails at any given opportunity. So I'm provoking with the word slave. You're putting a lot of nuance to it, and I'm trying to get to a notion of human dignity. That's all I'm trying to do, which is to say compelling or forcing someone against their will, we can agree, is not a very dignified way to treat someone. And that is what the modern labor condition that we find ourselves in for creators of all stripes. We are being dragged kicking and screaming into the maw of a giant information machine against our will, and our labor is not being credited or compensated. And this is, for me, speaking as a firebrand, a revolutionary moment where we're talking about the conditions of our labor in a much bigger sense than just my own personal history for what brought me to such a vociferous defense of the dignity of humankind.
Well, certainly as an advocate for artists' rights.
Indeed.
I've definitely made the wisecrack that, it was Gutenberg's printing press that turned, you brought up the idea of knowledge as power, turned knowledge production into an industry for the very first time, turned human communication into a business and into a vocation. And the things that have been going on lately, since before the turn of the century, maybe it started in 1968, 1969 with the Department of Defense and DARPA.
That's much earlier. That's like start of the 60s for...
What's been going on may be actually taking all of this back in certain ways, but I don't know, maybe not. Maybe that industry that was created back then and that resulted in the modern record industry that starts after World War II in a lot of ways. Maybe what's going on and the anarchy of it is time for a reset and time for a start. I don't know.
Maybe.
Obviously, it's wreaked havoc on what you were doing and what you've been doing since.
If the proposition that it's time for a reset can encompass labor relations going back to antiquity, then yes, I will accept that premise. Otherwise, I'm just going to go straight to a very solid McLuhan principle and say that it's the technology of information that is attempting to reframe the question of human dignity, that whether it's the Gutenberg press or whether it's generative AI, it's powered by sources of energy that still leave the basic human labor question unresolved. And the only thing I can think to resolve that with is peace and love. That, we start to respect the rights of our fellow human beings. And my alternative was to withhold my labor in a very unorthodox way.
Well, I mean, if we were to look at that in terms of the complete span of media history, then we would go back to before anything was written down. And so you had the singer of tales, as they've been referred to, which is, the bard, the
Troubadour.
epic poet, which poetry and song are not distinct forms in that oral culture that existed. And there is no ownership in the sense of anything because there's nothing to own. So the singer gets compensated in some way
For singing?
For singing, and what was understood is that the performance is a composition, because if there's no other thing than the performance, there's no, say, document. All there is the performance, which happens in the moment and disappears in that moment, then that is the thing. That is the art. And that is what you are compensated for in one way or another. And anyone can take the same narrative, and much of what they were doing were trying to traditions handed down and from one to another, or taking that tradition and inserting something new, inserting a new character, a new individual to tell their story. But, that is something that belonged to everybody in the culture. Then writing comes along, and you get a written document, and in many cases attributed to an individual. So suddenly we get the traditional songs being attributed to Homer, for example, No one quite sure who that was, but and then we get the sort of the Attic playwrights of ancient Greece, and we say, okay, this is by Aeschylus, for example, and that concept of authorship comes into play, but people still feel free to copy the documents by hand, one after another, and change them as they see fit, because each person's document is their personal copy. Just like we, as Tom and I say as teachers, don't have any issue with our students writing down our words, whatever words they want, and we don't consider that to be a problem. And then, as you mentioned, Tom, it's when printing comes along that we get, after that, and significantly after that, the concept of copyright and the idea that making multiple copies is a kind of financial consideration, and you can claim ownership not of a single text, but of this abstract concept of a text which is not a physical object, but the complete form of expression and the ownership thereof. And from there we get the same principle being applied to many other forms later on, including recordings, audio recordings, and film and visual recordings. So,
but before you get up to date, there's also, in the history of music, there's an interesting jump from the oral culture of Greece and sung poetry to the Baroque period, which parallels the invention of the printing press, the development of musical notation,
right.
Bach writing things down, and that's the launching pad for the world in which Michel started making music.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Musical notation, and then eventually the copywriting. But first the claiming of credit for that, because when you go back to whatever the medieval ditties that we might still know, nobody knows. It's that all that stuff, or the folk songs, what we call folk songs, all that stuff by that Greek guy Anonymous.
It was a woman.
Or it could be an anonymousette, but somebody wrote those. Or wrote them and rewrote them and rewrote them. It happened at some time, but it's lost to history, and there was no reason to claim ownership, because if you came up with something, everyone around you knew that it was you, and you're happy that other people picked up on it and that it would survive. But once things became documented and especially multiplied, through forms of mass production, then it becomes something significant as financially to claim ownership of.
Listen, there are no two people I would rather inform me that I am wrong than you two. So I'm going to ask you to keep me on a short leash here.
Okay.
As you very delicately split the hairs on copyright and the labor involved in producing knowledge, I am reverting back to Plato's Mimesis. There is one perfect song. I didn't write it. It already existed in the mind of God. When I am inspired by some divine connection with that mind of God and compose that song, it's an iteration of a perfect idea. And when I record that song based on a perfect idea, it's a second iteration of that perfect idea. I've just basically limbed Plato's Mimesis. Thank you, poverty, for providing that education in a squat in Amsterdam. So, if we are being dragged kicking and screaming into the realm of perfect ideas, not imperfect reality, and if human dignity is being meted out, being portioned based on our contributions to that perfect idea, I'm going to suggest that we need to err on the side of the divine and not the quotidian, not the pedestrian principles of who does what labor on what format, in what media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm basically talking about, yes, artist rights, but also human rights, the dignity of humans, particularly to have that connection with the divine that allows us to be inspired by and to inspire a cosmic dialogue. Thank you for your patience. I laid that out. Now, please tell me, shocked you got it all wrong.
I wouldn't say that, but I do disagree with Plato because, and actually Aristotle did as well. For Aristotle, the perfect song is what you're working toward rather than what existed at the beginning. So for Plato, it's everything else is a pale sort of echo of that first kind of form, and for Aristotle, everything is moving toward the final form, the final perfection. I go back though, and I think this is consistent again with general semantics, that there is no such thing as perfection. That's a that's very high level abstraction. And Kenneth Burke in Rhetoric talked about human beings being rotten with perfection. It's like that idea makes us a little nuts that we can conceive of it. But I do want to say that going back to this point, that copyright comes in then, and the idea of ownership comes in about about 400 years ago or 300 years ago or so as a legal concept, and it is part of a new media environment. Then it gets threatened, as so many things do that were a product of typography and of that media environment, when electronics comes in, and it becomes so much easier to copy things, and it's so much easier to just undermine and do things differently than was done under earlier media conditions.
And the shift from the electronic to the digital in particular. Let me try this, because I don't have answers for you. I'm sorry. I have questions. And my question would be, in this, either in Lance's terms, search for perfection or finding the perfect as you compose, in this imperfect world, and given these industrial forces, what would need to happen? What would you have for you to feel comfortable and able to make your art and do your art today?
An excellent question, and I'm so glad you asked. I kept waiting for someone much brighter than me to come up with a listicle. I wanted the top 10 issues, the top 10 challenges that frustrate or thwart an artist to have the dignity in the labor market to conduct oneself accordingly. And no one was stepping up, and I was like, crap, I got to do this myself. And so I identified, number one, abolish Wikipedia. We don't have time to get to how I came to that conclusion. Number two, the bootleg was exacerbated, was amplified by digital mediums that allow copying at the speed of light.
And also perfect copying.
Copies, yes.
But the legislative vehicle that allows this to be done with zero liability was crafted as the brainchild of Ronald Reagan's Librarian of Congress, one James Billington, known as the father of the DMCA. And what the DMCA grants are these massive technology companies zero liability for the infringement that happens 1 million takedowns a day on YouTube. No liability whatsoever. And the line that they use, this galls me, is that as dumb pipes, they have no control over how the users use the technology. And I don't know what makes tech so exceptional that the Food and Drug Administration wouldn't grant this safe harbor. You know, automotive industries don't grant it, even automatic weapons. But somehow, this military-grade weapon known as the internet has been given a free pass in which all of humanity becomes collateral damage for their seeking of profit. So that was my second point. Abolish the DMCA license and bootlegging that goes with it.
Which for our listeners is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA, just making sure. Go ahead.
And it's Section 512 of the Copyright Act, if you want to know. So there are also compulsory licenses in place for music artists that, as, for example, generative AI debates are roiling about Midjourney just stealing whole cloth visual artists' labor, or, you know, other New York Times and for authors and journalists. But music seems to be the gateway drug for all of this, because there is a compulsory license for anyone who wants to do a cover of my song after I've first published it. And there is a compulsory license for any terrestrial radio station to broadcast my song once I've released it for commercial release. And those rates, those compulsory rates, are set by Congress, and they remain frozen for over 90 years. They were established when people were still using buggy whips to drive horses, and they stayed frozen because no one's incentivized to increase a compulsory license rate, because it works for everyone except for the people whose labor is being compelled. So
that's even worse than wages, labor wages, salaries, and all.
Though that's just a little sampling of a project that I created called Musical Chairs, in which I wrote a song for each of these 10 labor conditions that are not allowing artists to be truly free to create on a fair market basis. So I won't belabor it, but that's just a taste.
Let me ask you this, because when people generally think about the internet, and they think about that idea or information just wants to be free. It tends to be framed as user-generated content and person-to-person communication. And that was, going back to the point about Napster, that was what Napster was about, was that it was just fans and, regular people exchanging files that they had. Your point, though, does come back to large corporations and the industry. So can you perhaps say something about the distinction between the two, or how the two connect?
I'm going to do you a kindness because I know where this conversation needs to go next. So I am going to invoke this statement. They say the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing you that he doesn't exist. But I'm going to say it in the context of a spiritual appeal, something that we know innately inside of us. If you were the devil, where would you hide? So the idea that it's not the machine that's generating this infringement, but it's the users who are choosing to use the machine in ways that violate, but like so microscopically that one at a time nothing adds up and leads to these monopsonies, these multi-billion-dollar corporations aggregating the value of all of that abuse, a death of 1 billion cuts. So I argue that they've weaponized our own fans against us. And that's the betrayal that I find unacceptable, because I love my fans. My fans love my music. But there's a fly in the ointment here, and something has come and divided this passion between the fans of my music and me, and I had to take a drastic evasive action.
This is such a great point, because you look back, and traditionally fans and artists formed a united front against industry. And I think in terms of television, the two great examples from my childhood where fans were able to rescue series that were canceled. The first one was The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and then the second one was the original Star Trek series, where fans demanded that cancellation be canceled, and were able to get the program to at least go back for another season. So fans are always the ones defending the artist rather than being pitted against the artist. But it does speak to kind of a classic strategy that Marxists would point to of divide and conquer, right? That when you are in the dominant group, your strategy is to divide the different groups beneath you so that they're against each other rather than working together to take down the dominant group.
Also, when you get to the age of the internet, and specifically with music, Napster, and we've talked about how the user suddenly has a certain power with respect to everything that had come before and the industry as it existed to provide music to us listeners. Go forward a couple of years to an age of social media, and suddenly users are creators of content, right? That's the definition of social media, is user-generated content. And, well, for the user, what's the difference between what Michelle does and what I'm doing as I'm putting my stuff out there, and the world is flat, right? And, the idea that you're taken for granted.
Take that to the next level, Tom Jen
Please.
Corelli, because now with a prompt, you can also, you don't need to have any talent, you don't need to have studied, you don't need to have dedicated anywhere. You can become an artist by prompting a machine to create. Voila. There's money to be made. There's gold in them Nar Hills.
I don't know if we'll make it, but certainly the technologists, the Musks, the Zuckerbergs, they'll make it.
Although it's typically not the actual technologists, it's the ones who are hiring the technologists and have the means to do so.
Let me raise that one more level. It's the people that own the hydroelectric dams and the fracking equipment that drive those machines.
Well, they're certainly part of it, although, ultimately, when we look at the richest folks, they do tend to be the ones who own the tech companies. So, but they're all doing pretty well as compared to the vast majority of us who put our content out there for free. Which in academia, for folks like Tom and I mean that's sort of par for the course. It's part of public service. In that sense, but it's not something that in exchange we get things like
tenured positions,
tenure, and let's not go into some of the ways in which tenure has been is being undermined.
Tenuous at best.
Yeah,
at best. That's not for this conversation.
Yeah, let's hold off for another time. On that, but artists don't have tenure. Unless they get an academic position, which is a completely other point. But artists don't have tenure. Artists don't have regular employment.
Benefits.
Yeah. So that goes back to the point that do we want to support and do we want to allow people to make a living and to gain the kind of rightful profits from their labor.
See, that's where I think, as we've talked about it, and it's always a vague word to say technology, that's where I think the current state of these technologies has affected the user, where they say, I can get Michelle's stuff for free. I can put a cover version of her song up on YouTube and play it. And they're completely taking for granted who you are, what it is you have to offer the world, out of convenience.
I know where this conversation needs to go. And so I am going to take your point, Tom, and say it is self-evident. They do not want the artist. They want the art. No one ever needs to convince me again that that statement is anything but the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I think McLuhan would say that the artist is the art.
Well, God bless Marshall McLuhan then, because without artists, art is meaningless. However, not according to technological innovation. Machines can create art with no humans involved whatsoever. And we like it that way, don't we?
Well, we're on the precipice of dealing with that in so many ways when we talk about AI and AGI. And, I come back to a version of what Lance just said in Invoking McLuhan, and what you're saying, in that the human who creates matters more than anything that the machine can do. And that humans created the machines, humans use the machines to create art, but once the machines have taken over.
So here's Ben in the booth recording this kiss. Thank you, Tom.
Well, I also think of how McLuhan was fond of the Ezra Pound quote that the artist is the antenna of the race, which was echoed by Kurt Vonnegut, and he talked about creative people as being canaries in a coal mine, which made for a nice song sometime later on.
Yes.
But that, it's not just the art itself, but the ability to pick up on what is, and this is, there's a distinction to be made between sort of popular artists who simply play to the current fashion and great artists, if you like, who are incredibly sensitive and pick up on what is happening, what is coming, and what most people are not seeing, that's just around the bend or just happening, and giving us a warning if we're willing to listen to it.
And that's Burke too, right? Going all the way back to his first book, Counterstatement. The artist is making a counterstatement against the life's world in which he, she, they live.
Which is also McLuhan, that the artist provides a counter environment,
Yep.
which gives us a place to stand where we can see what is normally invisible to us, the actual environment that we inhabit.
Listen to me, time binders. Are you listening to this erudite, highly astute dialogue between two professors who have devoted their lives to the advancing of our spiritual and cultural knowledge? They are creating here in this studio for yours truly an atmosphere of love and safety, because they know that in my lifetime I have not only been canceled, but I have been crucified.
The conversation between Michelle Schacht and IGS trustees Lance Straight and Tom Gencarelli is far from over. If you want to hear more, and I know you do, the interview will be continued in the next episode of Semantic Reactions. Keeping in mind the time constraints for this podcast, we did want to leave enough room to include two songs that Michelle played for us live at the VoxPod New York City studio. Let's enjoy them now.
We are hoping to maybe have you grace us with some music.
Sure, this is a song that was performed in San Francisco. It's called Other People. Needless to say, it is copyright protected, registered, copyright protected, but was uploaded nonetheless, along with the rest of the bootleg. And for 7 years, YouTube denied the takedown because of the DMCA license. Although I know my love for you is true, I seem to bring out the very worst in you. Perhaps you thought my love could be bought. Perhaps you think we're happy, but we're not. I tried to talk it out, but you just take it out on me. And shouted me to shut up and turn the volume up on the TV. And when the neighbors all began to complain, you yell at me and you tell me it's my treachery to blame. I gave you my trust, but now I'm taking back the same. For the things that you are doing in our name. All I ever needed you to show me was your soul. But I see all you ever really wanted was control. And now I know this wasn't part of your plan. But I'm singing this citizen to country, not woman to man. I'm singing we should see other people. I believe we should see other people. Oh, I believe with all my heart that we should start to see other people. On February 3rd, I will be appearing at the Delancey as part of the Composer's Concordance called Poems and Violins, and I will be performing a song called Ethel Died for Your Sins with Lynn Bechtold on violin and arranged by Randy Wolf. Other than the general semantics community that has given my life here in New York so much color and excitement, I've also found a group of radical composers called Composer's Concordance. Gene Pritzker and Dan Cooper lead the fray. And yeah, keep on rocking, y'all. I promise I will if you will. I know how this story ends, but where to begin? I call him brother, never friend. Ethel died for his sin. Oh, Ethel died for his sin. Here's something you'll appreciate. You've altered witness for the state. Crimes of war, you exonerate. take your time, I can wait. Oh, take your time, I can wait. All the money in the world can't buy your peace of mind. And all the time it takes to dissipate won't cover up your crime. You took a mother from her home. You left 2 small children all alone. Your justice is just a heart of stone. Mercy, 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 she's gone. Mercy, mercy, she's gone. Let's do that chorus again, it's so good. All the money in the world can't buy your peace of mind. All the time it takes to dissipate won't cover up your crime. Sing it with me, Tom. All the money in the world. All the money in the world can't buy your peace of mind. All the time it takes to dissipate. Here. All the time it takes to dissipate won't cover up your crime. All right, so this is Michelle Schacht and Tom Gencarelli. We're going to be doing a concert at the Players Club in Gramercy on February 15th for, is it Media Ecology and General Semantics? Or just
It's the Institute of General Semantics, co-sponsored by the New York Society for General Semantics. Register for it on the Institute of General Semantics website, generalsemantics.org.
Blue Race. Tom Gencarelli.
And Michelle, thank you so much for playing for us.
Such as it is. Thanks, y'all.
You've been listening to our January 2024 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring part 1 of an interview with Michelle Schacht. Special thanks to the VoxPod New York City studio, Randy Hudson, and engineer Ben Connors. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's General Semantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 17th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.